The council chamber was huge. Beings from across the galaxy sat in curved rows that went up like steps in a stadium. Each species had their own section with special air and gravity controls. The room smelled like a mix of strange gases and cleaning. Chemicals. Captain Jake Morrison stood behind thick glass in the viewing area. His uniform was simple blue and gray, nothing fancy like the colorful robes and metal suits worn by the alien diplomats below. Next to him, Lieutenant Commander Amy Carter checked her datapad for the third time in 10 minutes. "Same old garbage," Amy whispered. She was young for her rank, only 32, but her dark eyes looked tired. "They have been arguing about the same trade route for 6 hours." Jake nodded. He was 51 and had seen enough politics to last 3 lifetimes. His hair was going gray at the edges, and small lines showed around his eyes when he smiled. But he was not smiling now. In the chamber, Ambassador Zethkar was standing at his podium. The Viridian was tall and thin with blue-green skin that looked like scales. His voice was high and sharp when he spoke. "The Crystalline Empire continues to break our agreements," Zethkar said. His words were translated into dozens of languages. Through the chamber's computer system, they promised safe passage through Sector 7. But our ships are being attacked by pirates every week. The crystalline representative rose from her seat. Her people looked like living gems, all angles and bright colors that changed with their moods. Right now she was flashing angry red patterns. "The Viridians speak lies," she said. Her voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "Our patrol ships protect that sector. If pirates attack, it is because the Viridians are too weak to defend themselves." The chamber erupted in noise. Other species began taking sides. The bird-like Axon squawked their support for the crystallines. The slug-like Hurani made wet gurgling sounds that meant they backed the Viridians. Jake watched it all with growing disgust. 3 months ago, humanity had returned to galactic politics after 300 years away. They had hoped things would be different. They had hoped wrong. "Look at them," Amy said. "They act like children fighting over toys." "Worse than children," Jake replied. "At least kids sometimes share." The argument was getting louder. Now the Viridian ambassador was pointing at the crystalline section and making threats. The crystalline was flashing bright yellow, which Jake had learned meant extreme anger. "If one more Viridian ship enters our space without permission," the crystalline said, "we will turn it into space dust." "You dare threaten us?" Zethkar's voice went even higher. "The Viridian fleet will turn your crystal worlds into gravel." More species joined in. The Keth delegation began hissing. The mechanical Syntrons made beeping sounds that hurt the ears. In the back, smaller species cowered in their seats. Jake noticed how the weak ones always suffered when the strong ones fought. Ambassador Carl King, the senior human diplomat, leaned over to Jake. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back tight. Her face showed the stress of 3 months. Trying to work with beings who seemed to have no concept of basic decency. "This is getting out of hand," she said. Jake nodded. Below them, the Viridian ambassador had left his podium and was walking toward the crystalline section. His hands were reaching for something on his belt. The crystallines were standing up, their bodies flashing warning colors. "Stop this," called the session leader, a fat orange being from the neutral Plutarch species. "Return to your seats." Nobody listened. More species were getting involved. The chamber was turning into a mob. Jake looked at Amy. She looked back at him. They both knew what was coming. In 30 seconds, this would turn into a fight. In an hour, it would be a war. In a week, innocent beings on dozens of worlds would be dead. He stood up. The movement was slow and calm, but somehow it caught attention. First Amy noticed, then Ambassador King, then a few aliens in the seats near the viewing area. Jake walked to the rail that separated the viewing area from the main chamber. There was a time, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, when such disputes were settled with honor. The room went quiet, not the quiet of beings listening, but the quiet of beings confused. Jake could see puzzled looks on faces that had been red with anger just seconds before. Zethkar was the first to speak. What did the humans say? The translation computers made strange noises. They were trying to process a word that did not exist in half the languages in the chamber. Honor, Jake repeated. It means doing what is right even when it costs you something. It means keeping your word even when breaking it would be easier. It means protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The crystalline ambassador tilted her head. Her body was flashing confused purple patterns. This word has no meaning. There is only strength and weakness. The strong take what they want. The weak give what they must. No, Jake said. He was not shouting, but his voice filled the chamber. The strong protect the weak. That is what strength is for. Laughter came from several sections. The mechanical syntrons made beeping sounds that their computers translated as mockery. Even some of the smaller species seemed amused. Foolish humans, Zethkar said. You disappeared for 3 centuries and come back with fairy tales. This is how the real galaxy works. Power decides everything. Power without honor is just bullying, Amy said. She had moved up next to Jake at the rail. Any thug can threaten someone weaker. It takes a real being to use strength to help instead of hurt. More laughter. The session leader was trying to restore order, but nobody was listening anymore. They were all focused on the humans who were saying things that made no sense. Chancellor Vexith of the Academic Council stood up. He was a spider-like being with too many eyes and a voice like grinding metal. Humans speak of impossible things. No species follows such rules. It would make them weak, would it? Jake asked. He looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces. Look where your way has gotten you. How many wars this year? How many trade disputes? How many broken agreements? That is simply how things are, the crystalline said. Her colors had shifted to bored blue-green. Conflict is natural. The strong survive, and the weak suffer, Jake said. And tomorrow, when you are weak, someone stronger will make you suffer, and the cycle continues forever. He paused and looked directly at Zethkar. What if there was another way? What if beings kept their promises because breaking them was wrong, not because they feared punishment? What if the strong used their power to build instead of destroy? Impossible, several voices said at once. Jake smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It was not a happy smile. 300 years ago, humans thought the same thing. We were just like you. We fought and lied and cheated and called it civilization. What changed? Asked a small voice from the back. It was one of the Minari, a species that looked like blue-furred cats. They were always getting pushed around by bigger species. We remembered something we had forgotten, Jake said. We remembered that being civilized is not about having better weapons or faster ships. It is about choosing to be better than you have to be. The chamber was very quiet now. Jake could see beings thinking, processing ideas that were completely foreign to them. You speak of dreams, Zethkar said finally. Pretty words that mean nothing in the real world. Maybe, Jake admitted. But 3 centuries ago, a group of humans decided to try living by those dreams. It worked. We stopped fighting each other. We built instead of destroyed. We helped instead of hurt. And then you ran away and hid, the crystalline pointed out. Yes, Jake said. We did. We were afraid we would become like the rest of the galaxy again. But hiding was wrong too. Some things are too important to keep to yourself. Ambassador King joined them at the rail. The human delegation requests a recess, she announced formally. We have a proposal to make. but it will require time to prepare. The session leader looked confused, but nodded. Recess granted. We will reconvene tomorrow. As the chamber began to empty, Jake could hear the conversation starting. Beings were talking in small groups, their voices puzzled and uncertain. They were using new words, trying to understand concepts they had never encountered. Amy touched his arm. Think they heard us? Jake watched a group of young Minari talking excitedly to their elders. One of them kept repeating a word in there, language that the computers were translating as honor duty or right strength. Some of them did, he said. That is a start. As they left the viewing area, Jake could still hear the conversations below. For the first time in 3 months, beings were talking about something other than profit and power. They were asking questions about things they had never considered. It was a small beginning. But every forest started with a single seed. Dr. Helen Brooks stood in front of the largest library in the galaxy. The great library of Nexus Prime was a crystal building that reached into the clouds. Inside, beings from every known species came to study and learn. Today, Helen wished she was somewhere else. The lecture hall was packed. Hundreds of alien scholars sat in rows that curved around her speaking platform. Their eyes, sensors, and other strange organs all focused on her. Most looked skeptical. Some looked hostile. Helen was 45, with brown hair starting to show gray streaks. She wore simple clothes, not fancy robes like most of the other scholars. Her hands shook slightly as she touched the control that brought up her first image. Image showed a human in metal armor riding a 4-legged animal. The figure held a long pole with a sharp point and carried a shield marked with a cross. This is a knight, Helen said. Her voice echoed in the big room. They existed on Earth over 1,000 years ago. Chittering sounds came from the audience. Dr. Kexthu, a bug-like being with too many legs, raised one of his arms. Dr. Brooks, surely you do not expect us to believe such primitive warriors are relevant to modern galactic society. They were not just warriors, Helen replied. She clicked to the next image. This one showed humans helping injured people after a battle. Knights followed codes of behavior. They promised to protect innocent people, even if it meant dying. More sounds from the audience. This time, it was the whale-like Shatari, making deep humming noises that meant disbelief. Helen clicked again. The new image was harder to understand. It showed symbols and text in old human writing. This is the code of chivalry. It said that knights must be brave, honest, generous, and merciful. They had to help the weak and fight only for good causes. Chancellor. Vexith stood up in the front row. The spider being's many eyes glittered with what looked like amusement. Fiction, surely. No rational species would limit their warriors with such restrictions. They were not restrictions, Helen said, her voice getting stronger. They were the foundation of human civilization. Impossible, called out Professor Zanri from the hegemony section. The tall gray alien's voice was cold and precise. Such behavior would make warriors weak and inefficient. They could not compete with practical soldiers. Helen felt her face getting hot with anger, but she kept her voice calm. These knights conquered kingdoms and protected entire civilizations for centuries. Fairy tales, Vexith said. Humans tell stories to make their violent past seem noble. While Helen argued with scholars who would never understand, something very different was happening on the edge of civilized space. Commander Ben Taylor crouched behind a broken wall on Haven's Edge. The frontier planet was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be a new home for refugees from the war zones. Instead, it had become a hunting ground. Ben was 38 and had spent half his life in the military. His face was weathered from too many battles on too many worlds. Right now, he was trying to figure out how to save 5,000 people with only 12 soldiers. "How many ships do they have?" asked Sergeant Lisa Park. She was young, maybe 25, with short black hair and quick eyes. 37 that we can see," replied Corporal Danny White. He was looking through electronic binoculars at the Carrick Raider camp. "Maybe more hiding behind the hills." Ben did the math in his head. 37 ships meant at least 300 raiders. Maybe more. His team had good weapons and training, but they were still just 12 people. "Sir," said Private Tony Clark, "the Galactic Patrol won't answer our calls. They say Haven's Edge is too far from trade routes to matter." Ben was not surprised. Galaxy only protected what was profitable. Refugees had nothing to offer except gratitude, and gratitude did not buy weapons or fuel. A new sound made them all look up. Carrick flyers were coming back from their latest raid. They carried screaming. People in nets hanging below their ships. Ben could see families being separated, children crying for their parents. "They are taking them to the slave markets," Danny said quietly. Lisa spat in the dirt. "We should have stayed home. Earth Central never should have sent us to this forgotten corner of space." Ben looked at his team. They were good people, all of them. They had volunteered for this mission because someone had to help the refugees. But now they were facing impossible odds with no support dot. He thought about Dr. Brooks and her lectures about ancient knights. He thought about the codes she talked about, the promises to protect innocent people. Most of his team probably thought it was all nonsense. But as Ben watched another group of families being dragged from their homes, he made a decision that would change everything. "We hold the line," he said. "Sir?" Lisa looked confused. "We hold the line," Ben repeated. "We cannot win, but we can make them pay for every person they take. We can buy time for people to hide. We can show them that someone cares." Danny looked at him like he was crazy. "Sir, there are 300 of them and 12 of us. We will all die." "Maybe," Ben said, "but dying for nothing is still dying. At least this way, it means something." He stood up and checked his rifle. "Anyone who wants to leave can go. No shame in that. This is not your fight." Nobody moved. "Damn right, it is our fight," Lisa said. She stood up next to him. "These people asked for help. We came to help. Simple as that." One by one, the other soldiers stood up. Ben felt something tight in his chest loosen. Maybe Helen was right about those old codes. Maybe they meant something after all. The first attack came at sunset. 50 Carrick warriors charged the human position, expecting easy victory. They were wrong. Ben's team had used the afternoon to prepare. They built barriers from broken furniture and debris. They set traps in the streets. Most importantly, they convinced the refugees to help. When the Carricks came, they found humans who fought like the old stories, said knights should fight. Ben and his people did not retreat when things got bad. They did not abandon wounded comrades. They protected the people who could not protect themselves. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, 47 Carricks were dead or wounded. The humans had lost 2 people, but they still held their position. The second attack came at dawn. This time the Carricks sent 100 warriors in flying vehicles. Ben's remaining team fought from the ruins of what had been the town center. Around them, refugee families huddled in shelters made from crashed ships and broken buildings. Battle lasted longer. The Carricks had better weapons and more numbers, but they could not understand why the humans would not surrender. Every time it looked like the defense would break, someone would do something impossible. Lisa threw herself between a wounded refugee and a Carrick warrior. Danny used his body to shield children from an explosion. By noon, the Carricks had lost another 60 fighters. But Ben's team was down to 6 people, and they were running out of ammunition. The third attack should have been the end. 200 Carrick warriors surrounded the human position. Their leader, A huge beast with scars covering his arms called out in broken standard. Humans surrender now. Die quick. Fight more. Die slow. Ben stood up on the broken wall where everyone could see him. His uniform was torn and bloody. His rifle was almost empty, but his voice was strong and clear. "We are not here for ourselves," he shouted. "We are here for them." He pointed at the refugees behind him. "And we will not move." The Carrick leader laughed. "Stupid humans, you die for strangers. No profit, no sense." "You are right," Ben said. "No profit, but plenty of sense." The final battle began at sunset on the third day. Ben and his 5 remaining soldiers faced 200 enemies with almost no ammunition left. But something had changed during the 3 days of fighting. The refugees were no longer hiding. They stood with the humans, holding broken pipes and chunks of metal. Old beings who had fled from a dozen wars picked up rocks. Children who had never held weapons carried spare ammunition. They could not win. Everyone knew that. But they fought anyway, because 12 humans had shown them what it meant to have someone care enough to die for you. The Galactic Patrol finally arrived 6 hours later. They expected to find dead humans and empty buildings. Instead, they found Ben Taylor and 2 of his soldiers still alive, still standing guard over 5,000 refugees. The patrol commander, a professional military being from the Zentari species, walked through the battlefield in shock. He counted over 300 dead Carricks and the wreckage of 41 ships. How? He asked Ben. Ben was sitting against a wall, being treated by a refugee medic. His right arm was broken, and he had burns on his face, but his eyes were bright and clear. "We remembered something," Ben said. "We remembered why we became soldiers. In the first place, the story spread fast. Refugee networks carried it from system to system. Black market information brokers sold it to news services. Within a week, beings across the galaxy had heard about the Battle of Haven's Edge. Most dismissed it as propaganda or lies, but some believed it. Young beings especially began talking about honor humans and night protectors. They used words that barely translated but carried powerful meaning. On distant worlds, beings who had never heard of Earth began telling stories about warriors who fought not for money or glory, but because fighting was the right thing to do. Helen Brooks heard about Haven's Edge while she was still giving lectures to skeptical scholars. Admiral Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the Liberty, watching the stars through the big front window. The human fleet flagship was not the biggest ship in the galaxy, but it was home to 3,000 people who had spent the last 20 years exploring the outer rim. Lisa was 54 with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. She had joined the fleet when humanity first started coming back to galactic space. Back then, she thought they would be welcomed as equals. She had been wrong. "Admiral," said Captain Jerry Stone, her second in command, "we have another one." Lisa turned to look at the main screen. A small ship was approaching, moving slowly like it was damaged. The design was Minari, one of the cat-like species that got pushed around by everyone else. "Refugees?" Lisa asked. "Looks like it. They are broadcasting a message in broken standard. Something about seeking the honor humans." Lisa felt something twist in her stomach. Honor humans. That was what they were calling her people now. Word of Haven's Edge had spread faster than anyone expected. 3 months later, refugee ships were showing up at human colonies across the galaxy. "Let them dock," she said. Medical teams to Bay 3. The Minari ship was in bad shape. Burn marks covered its hull, and one engine was completely gone. When the airlock opened, 37 beings stumbled out. They were from 6 different species, all looking thin and scared. A young Minari female approached Lisa. Her blue fur was patched with gray from stress, and she walked with a limp You are the honor humans? She asked in careful standard. We are humans, Lisa replied. What happened to your ship? Hegemony Patrol caught us in neutral space. Said we owed taxes on cargo we never had. When we could not pay, they took our families. The Minari's voice broke. We heard humans help those who cannot help themselves. Lisa looked at the other refugees. An elderly Shatari was holding 2 small children who were not even his species. A wounded Syntron robot was sharing his power cell with a dying organic being. They had nothing except hope. Jerry, Lisa said quietly, set course for hegemony space. Admiral, we have no authority there. If we interfere with their operations, ... double quotes, then we interfere, Lisa said. Signal the fleet. We have work to do. While Admiral Morgan was preparing to rescue strangers, Engineer Rick Stone was facing his own crisis. On Gamma Station, the industrial platform orbited a gas giant in the neutral zone, where beings from dozens of species worked in the refineries and factories. Rick was 36, with thick arms from years of manual labor. His face was honest and open, the kind of face that made people trust him. Right now, he was angry enough to break things. 18 hours, he said to his assistant, Maria Santos. They are working 18 hours a day with no breaks. Maria was looking through the transparent aluminum window at the main factory floor. Hundreds of beings moved between machines that never stopped running. Most were small species, Minari, Taxon, Fairy, who had nowhere else to go. The hegemony overseers say it is legal, Maria said. The workers signed contracts. Contracts they could not read in languages they do not speak, Rick replied. That is not legal. That is slavery with paperwork. The hegemony had taken over Gamma Station 6 months ago. They brought efficient management and increased production. They also brought working conditions that killed people slowly instead of quickly. Rick watched a young Taxon collapse near one of the heavy lifters. The insect-like being was maybe 14 in human years, too young to be working at all. 2. Hegemony guards dragged him away from the machine and threw him in a corner. Get back to work, one of the guards shouted. Damaged goods do not get rest periods. Rick felt something hot and angry rise in his chest. He had been an engineer for 15 years, but before that he had been a soldier. He knew what it looked like when the strong hurt the weak for fun. Maria, send a message to all human personnel. Meeting in conference room 2 in 1 hour. What are you planning, Rick? Rick looked out at the factory floor again. The young Taxon was back on his feet, swaying as he tried to lift boxes twice his size. Around him, dozens of other beings worked in conditions that would have been illegal anywhere humans had influence. I am planning to remember what we are supposed to be, Rick said that the meeting was small. Only 43 humans worked on Gamma Station, and they were all technical specialists. Rick looked around the conference room at engineers, technicians, and medical staff. They were good people, but they were not soldiers. The situation is simple, Rick said. The hegemony is killing people slowly. We can stop it, or we can watch it happen. Dr. Nancy Cooper spoke up. She was the station's chief medical officer, a thin woman with kind eyes. Rick, I treat 20 work injuries every day. Malnutrition, exhaustion, chemical burns. Half of them are children. What can we do? Ask Tommy Lee, a young engineer fresh from Earth. We have no authority here. We have something better, Rick said. We have the ability to help. He touched. A control in the room's screens showed the station's layout. The human quarter has space for 3,000 people. We are using it for 43. You want to move them into our section? Asked Chief Engineer Bob Miller. The hegemony will never allow it. I am not asking the hegemony for permission, Rick said. I am telling them what is going to happen. The plan was simple. At the end of the work shift, Rick and his team would open the doors between the human quarter and the main station. Any being who wanted better conditions could cross over. The humans would provide food, medical care, and safe places to sleep. And when the hegemony objects? Dr. Cooper asked. Then we object back, Rick said. The word spread quickly through the station's alien population. Whispered conversations in dark corners. Coded messages passed between species that barely trusted each other. By the end of the shift, hundreds of beings were gathered near the human quarters entrance. Rick stood at the main gate with his entire team behind him. The refugees looked scared but hopeful. Behind them, hegemony guards were pushing through. The crowd. Open the gates, Rick said. The first being through was the young Texan who had collapsed earlier. He looked up at Rick with compound eyes that reflected the light like jewels. You help us? He asked in broken standard. We help you, Rick said. All of you. More beings poured through the gate. The hegemony guards reached the entrance just as the last refugee crossed over. Their leader, a tall creature with too many teeth, stepped forward. These workers belong to the hegemony, he said. Return them immediately. They belong to themselves, Rick replied. Anyone who wants to leave can leave. Anyone who wants to stay is welcome. You have no authority here, human. Rick looked at the guard, then at the hundreds of beings behind him. Men, women, and children from a dozen species who had been worked nearly to death. They were looking at him with something he had not seen in their eyes before, hope. I have the authority of being able to help, Rick said. That is enough. The standoff lasted 3 hours. Hegemony officials demanded the return of their workers. Rick and his team refused. The refugees huddled in the human quarter, afraid to believe they were really safe. Finally, the hegemony station commander arrived. He was a massive being with gray skin and small, cruel eyes. He brought 20 guards and a lot of anger. Human, you are in violation of 17 labor laws and 6 trade agreements. Surrender the workers or face the consequences. Rick stepped forward. Behind him, 42 other humans moved into position. They were not soldiers, but they stood like soldiers, united, determined. The consequences of what? Rick asked. Helping people, providing medical care, giving food to the hungry. The consequences of interfering with lawful business operations. If this is lawful, Rick said, pointing at the main factory floor, then the law is wrong. The commander raised his weapon. His guards did the same. For a moment, it looked like the situation would end in violence. Then something unexpected happened. The refugees began moving forward, not running away from the danger, but toward it. They formed a line between the hegemony guards and the humans. The young Texan was first. You want hurt honor humans. You hurt us first, he said in his broken standard. Others joined him. The elderly Centauri, the wounded fairy, beings who had been terrorized and broken for months, suddenly found courage they did not know they had. The hegemony commander looked at the crowd of refugees, then at the humans behind them. His weapon wavered. This is not over, he said finally. No, Rick agreed. It is not. But it is a beginning. News of the Gamma Station incident spread even faster than Haven's Edge had. Refugee networks carried the story to every corner of the galaxy. The idea that the strong could protect the weak without wanting something in return was revolutionary. Captain Sandra Wells heard about both incidents while her merchant ship, the Horizon's Call, was carrying supplies to the Outer Rim. She was 41 with red hair and freckles, the kind of person who made friends easily and kept them forever. Sandra had been a trader for 20 years. She knew the rules of galactic commerce better than most lawyers. Rule 1 was simple. Never risk your ship for someone who could not pay you back. That rule was about to be tested. The Horizons. Call was 3 days out from New Singapore when the distress signal came. 6 civilian freighters were under attack by Skull Brotherhood pirates in the neutral zone. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was bigger than any meeting in 50 years. Every species sent their best diplomats and their angriest complaints. The chamber was so full that some delegates had to stand in the back. Ambassador Carol King sat in the human section, watching the chaos with tired eyes. She was 62 now and had spent 6 months dealing with formal protests, angry messages, and threats from every major power in the galaxy. Chancellor Vexith was speaking from the main podium. The spider being's voice was sharp with anger as he read from a long list of complaints. The humans have interfered with legal mining operations on 17 worlds. They have disrupted lawful trade in 43 systems. They have given shelter to criminals and tax evaders across the Outer Rim. Murmurs of agreement came from around the chamber. The hegemony delegation nodded their approval. The crystalline empire flashed angry colors. Even some of the smaller species looked upset. Worse than interference, continued Vexith, they spread dangerous ideas. Young beings across the galaxy refuse to follow proper social order. They speak of honor and duty as if these ancient concepts matter more than law and profit. Representative Kelter from the Skull Brotherhood stood up. The pirate organization had been given a seat on the council 3 years ago in exchange for keeping their raids to acceptable levels. Human ships attack our vessels without provocation, Kelter growled. They cost us millions in lost revenue and damaged equipment. This cannot continue. More complaints followed. The Sintran Collective reported humans freeing their indentured workers. The Traders Union accused humans of disrupting established commercial relationships. The Military Alliance claimed humans were making their soldiers soft with talk of protecting civilians. Carol listened to it all without speaking. Finally, Chancellor Vexith turned to the human section. Ambassador King, how do you answer these charges? Carol stood slowly. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore the plain blue uniform that all human diplomats used. She looked small and ordinary compared to the colorful aliens around her. Everything you have said is true, she began. The chamber erupted in surprised voices. Delegates looked at each other with confusion. Nobody had expected the humans to admit to breaking galactic law. Carol waited for the noise to die down, then continued. We have interfered with mining operations that used slave labor. We have disrupted trade in stolen goods. We have given shelter to families fleeing persecution. We have spoken to young beings about honor and duty. Then you admit to criminal behavior, Vexith said. No, Carol replied. We admit to doing what is right. Laughter came from several sections. The idea that right and wrong could be different from legal and illegal seemed funny to beings who had spent centuries following only written law. You speak of ancient superstitions, said the crystalline ambassador. Law is what matters. Order is what matters. Your chaos threatens everything we have built. Carol looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces. Most showed anger or confusion. But in the back sections, where the smaller species sat, she saw something different. Hope. What have you built? She asked. Wars that never end? Trade. Disputes that cost millions of lives? A galaxy where the strong prey on the weak without consequence. We have built civilization, Vexith replied. No, Carol said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. You have built a machine that turns suffering into profit. You call it civilization because it has rules, but rules without justice are just organized cruelty. She paused and looked directly at the young beings in the observation galleries. Students and children from dozens of species were watching the proceedings, their faces bright with interest. You speak of law, Carol continued. But you have forgotten justice. You mention rights, but ignore responsibility. You claim civilization, yet practice barbarism with contracts and legislation as your shield. The chamber was getting louder. Angry voices called out from every section. But Carol kept talking. Humanity withdrew from galactic affairs 3 centuries ago because we were becoming like you. We had forgotten who we were meant to be. We return now not as conquerors or competitors, but as a reminder of what civilization truly means. Pretty words, shouted Kelter, but words do not change reality. The strong rule because they can. The weak serve because they must. This is the natural order. Natural for animals, Carol replied. But we are supposed to be more than animals. We are supposed to be civilized. The session devolved into shouting matches and formal protests. Carol sat down and watched it all with sadness. She had hoped for better, but she was not surprised that, while the politicians argued, General Frank Adams was reading reports in his office. On Kepler Station, the military command center was humanity's main base in this part of the galaxy, and Frank had been watching the situation develop for months. Frank was 58 with gray hair and scars from too many battles. He had been a soldier for 40 years and thought he had seen everything. The reports on his desk proved him wrong. 18 separate incidents this week, said Colonel Steve Murphy, his aide. Human ships engaging pirates, protecting refugees, interfering with what the galaxy considers normal business. Frank looked at the tactical displays on his wall. Green dots showed human ships and stations. Red dots showed trouble spots where humans had gotten involved in conflicts that were none of their business. Casualties? Frank asked. Surprisingly, light. Humans fight smart and usually have local support. But, sir, we cannot keep this up. The Council is talking about sanctions. Some species want to declare us a rogue state. Frank nodded. He had expected this reaction. The galaxy did not like change, especially change that made them question their own behavior. What about the other reports? Frank asked. Steve looked uncomfortable. Sir, those are harder to verify. We have accounts from 17 systems of non-human ships copying our tactics. Young beings from various species are forming what they call honor guards. Frank raised an eyebrow. Honor guards? Small groups that help refugees, stop pirates, protect the weak. They use human symbols and try to follow what they think are knightly codes. The general walked to his window and looked out at the stars. In the distance, he could see ships from 6 different species docked at the station. 6 months ago, most of them would not have spoken to each other. Are they effective? Frank asked. Very. The Minari Honor Guard saved 3 colonies from hegemony tax collectors. The young fairy rescued 100 kidnapped children from slave traders. Even some crystalline youth are forming protection groups. Frank smiled for the first time in weeks. The kids get it, sir. The young ones understand what we are trying to do. Their parents are too set in their ways, but children learn fast. On New Geneva, Dr. Matt Rogers was documenting exactly what the general suspected. The anthropologist had spent 3 months studying how human ideas were spreading through galactic society. Matt was 34 with brown hair and curious eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had come to New Geneva to study refugee communities, but found something much more interesting. The pattern is consistent across all species, he said to his research assistant, Dr. Susan Lee. They were sitting in a cafe that served beings from 12 different worlds. Young individuals are adopting human concepts of honor and duty at remarkable rates. Susan looked at her datapad. The numbers are incredible. 47% of beings under 25 express positive views of human ethical systems. Only 12% of adults over 40 agree. Matt watched a group of young aliens playing in the street outside. They were from 5 different species. But they were all wearing makeshift armor and playing games about protecting imaginary kingdoms. They are not just learning human values, Matt said. They are teaching them to their parents. The change was most visible in the frontier colonies. Places like Haven's Edge, where humans had made their stand, became pilgrimage sites for young beings across the galaxy. They came to see where Commander Taylor had held the line, where ordinary people had chosen to do extraordinary things. Stories grew in the telling. Commander Taylor became Sir Taylor the Defender. Engineer Stone became Lord Stone the Protector. Captain Wells became Lady Wells the Brave. The humans involved tried to correct the stories, but nobody listened. Let them have their legends, Carol had told Frank during one of their private conversations. Truth is important, but inspiration is more important. The inspiration was working. Human-protected zones became safe havens for anyone fleeing persecution. Trade agreements began including clauses about worker protection and fair treatment. Pirates found their targets defended not just by humans, but by mixed-species crews who fought with honor. But the most significant change was happening in the schools. Professor Diana Kim taught at the Galactic Youth Academy on Proxima Station. She was 41 with kind eyes and endless patience for her diverse students. Her classroom held young beings from 23 different species. Today we will discuss the concept of noblesse oblige, Diana said, writing the strange human. Words on the teaching screen. A young Sintran raised his mechanical hand. Teacher Kim, what does this phrase mean? It means that those with power have a duty to help those without power. The strong must protect the weak. A crystalline student. Flashed confused purple colors. Captain Tony Clark stood on the command deck of the defense station above New Geneva, watching his sensors with growing worry. The human colony below was home to 2 million people from 30 different species. Most were refugees who had found safety under human protection. Tony was 43 with dark hair and steady hands. He had been a merchant captain until 6 months ago, when the colony asked him to organize their defense force. He was not a military genius, but he understood something important. Sometimes ordinary people had to do extraordinary things. How? Many ships? Asked Commander Kelly Ross, his second in command. She was young and nervous, having joined the defense force only 2 weeks earlier. 112, Tony replied, reading the sensor display. All heavy combat vessels. This is not a raid. This is an execution. The Shadow Corp fleet was 3 hours away and closing fast. Their ships were painted black with skull symbols, and their reputation for cruelty was known across the galaxy. They took no prisoners and left no survivors. Tony looked at his own force on the tactical screen. 23 ships total. Most were converted civilian vessels with light weapons and minimal armor. His largest ship was a patrol cruiser that the Galactic Navy had marked for scrap. Sir, said Lieutenant Andy Kim from the communications station, we are getting signals from outside the system. Galactic Patrol? Tony asked hopefully. No, sir. These are ... different. Andy put the first message on the main screen. The face that appeared was young and blue-furred, a Minari who looked barely old enough to fly a ship. This is Kyline of the Minari Honor Guard, the young alien said in careful standard. We received your distress call. We come to stand with the Knights of Terra. More faces appeared on secondary screens. A crystalline youth flashing determined orange colors. A group of young faerie in a ship that looked like it was held together with spare parts. Even a few Sintran robots who had somehow learned to care. About organic beings. Guardian Wing reporting, said another voice. We stand with the honor humans. Tony felt something tight in his chest. How many ships? Andy checked his readings 3 times before answering. Sir, I count 47 vessels. All small fighters and converted civilian ships. Most of the pilots sound very young. Kelly looked confused. Sir, these are not military vessels. Most of them probably have no combat experience at all. Tony nodded. The young beings coming to help had more courage than sense. Their ships were no match for ShadowCorp warships. They would probably all die in the first few minutes of battle, but they were coming anyway. Open a channel to all incoming ships, Tony said. When the channel was ready, Tony looked directly into the camera. This is Captain Clark of New Geneva Defense. I appreciate your offer of help, but you should know the odds. We are facing a professional military force with superior numbers and equipment. Many of us will not survive this battle. The first response came from the young Minari. Captain Clark, my grandmother told me stories of the Battle of Haven's Edge. She said humans stood against impossible odds because it was right. Today, we stand with you because it is right. This is Crystal Wing, added the crystalline pilot. My people have forgotten honor, but I have not. Where honor humans fight, I fight. More voices joined in. Young beings from species that had been enemies for generations, all saying the same thing. They would stand together against those who preyed on the innocent. Tony felt tears in his eyes. All ships take positions around the defense perimeter. We make our stand here. The combined fleet looked pitiful compared to what was coming. 70 ships total, most of them barely harmed. But as Tony watched them move into formation, he saw something that made him smile. They flew like they had been working together for years. The young pilots had studied human tactics and knightly codes. They understood that protecting others was more important than protecting themselves. Sir, Andy called out, the ShadowCorp fleet is entering the system. On the main screen, the enemy ships appeared like a dark cloud. 112 warships in perfect formation, their weapons, powered and ready. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never faced real resistance. The lead ship broadcast a message across all frequencies. Crime boss Naktar appeared on screen, his scarred face twisted with cruel amusement. Humans of New Geneva, he said, you have interfered with business for the last time. Surrender now, and we will kill you quickly. Resist, and we will make you suffer. Tony opened a response channel. This is Captain Clark. New Geneva is under the protection of beings who believe in honor and justice. You are not welcome here. Naktar laughed. Honor? Justice? You face the most powerful criminal fleet in the galaxy with toys and children. Your honor will not stop our weapons. Maybe not, Tony admitted, but it will give us something worth dying for. The battle began badly. The ShadowCorp ships opened fire at maximum range with weapons that could destroy planets. 3 defender ships were vaporized in the first volley. 2 more were crippled and drifting. Tony's patrol cruiser shook under enemy fire. Sparks flew from damaged systems, and the lights flickered. Shields down to 60%, Kelly reported. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7. Guardian wings, attack pattern 7, Tony called over the radio. The young pilots responded perfectly. They scattered into small groups and attacked the enemy flanks. Their ships were too small to destroy the big warships, but they could damage engines and weapons. A young ferry pilot named Zach managed to disable a ShadowCorp cruiser's main gun. His ship was destroyed seconds later, but his sacrifice saved a dozen other vessels. This is Crystal Wing, called the crystalline pilot. My engines are hit. I am going to ram the command ship. Negative, Crystal Wing, Tony responded. Break off and retreat. Sorry, Captain Clark. Some things are more important than living. The crystalline fighter crashed into Naktar's flagship, destroying its bridge and killing the crime boss. But the enemy fleet kept coming. More defender ships were destroyed. Young pilots who had learned about honor in school were dying to protect people they had never met. Their last messages were not pleas for help or cries of fear. Tell my family. I fought with honor, said a Minari pilot as his ship broke apart. The weak are protected, whispered a dying Cintran robot. Tony felt rage and pride warring in his chest. These young beings were better than the galaxy deserved. Sir, Andy called. Out. New contacts on long-range sensors. Tony looked at the display and felt his heart skip. More ships were entering the system. Lots of them. The first wave was galactic patrol vessels. Not many, but they were real warships with experienced crews. Behind them came civilian ships from dozens of species. Merchants, colonists, even some military deserters who had decided that honor mattered more than orders. This is Admiral Lisa Morgan, aboard the Liberty, came a familiar voice. Sorry, we are late to the party. The human fleet had arrived. Not just military ships, but every human vessel within 3 days' travel. They had come to protect a colony that most of them had never seen, but the most amazing sight was behind the human fleet. Ships from every major species in the galaxy. Not official military vessels, but private ships crewed by beings who had heard about the battle and decided to help. This is Captain Vex Rin of the independent cruiser Freedom, called a Viridian voice. My crew voted to stand with the Honor humans. Ferry Protection Squadron reporting, said another voice. We fight for those who cannot fight. Even some crystalline military ships had broken away from their fleet to join the battle. Their captains faced court-martial for disobeying orders, but they came anyway. Within an hour, the Shadow Corp fleet was outnumbered 3-1. Ships that had been enemies yesterday fought side by side today. The criminals found themselves facing something they had never encountered before, a united galaxy. The battle turned into a rout. Shadow Corp ships surrendered or fled as fast as they could. Those who tried to fight were overwhelmed by beings who had finally remembered what they were fighting for. When the shooting stopped, Tony found himself in command of the largest mixed-species fleet in galactic history. Ships from 30 different races flew in formation, their crews working together like they had trained for years. Captain Clark, said Admiral Morgan over the radio, how did you manage to coordinate all these ships? Tony looked at his tactical display, where green dots showed vessels from species that had been bitter enemies just months ago. I did not coordinate anything, Admiral. They coordinated themselves. It was true. Young beings across the galaxy had built their own communication networks, sharing tactics and codes based on human examples. They had created something new, a military force based on shared values instead of shared biology. The aftermath of New Geneva was even more significant than the battle itself. The Galactic Council found itself facing something it had never seen before, a popular movement that crossed every political and species boundary. Ambassador Carol King addressed the council one last time 3 months later. The chamber was different. Now, many of the old delegates had been replaced by younger beings who spoke different languages of honor and duty. You asked us to leave, Carol said, looking around at faces that were no longer entirely hostile. You said our ideas were dangerous to your way of life. You were right.